major asked me to come and talk to you, I accepted it willingly without any reservations. Also, I want you to know that it is painful and hard for me to talk about my experiences in a concentration camp. You know, when I came to this wonderful country of ours, the first thing I wanted to do is forget what happened to me. I wanted to become an American. I met a young, lovely lady, married her, became an American citizen within 2 years, had a family, started business. I put it all behind me. However, there was an incident that occurred during my early incarceration in Auschwitz, which really makes me come and talk about it, and here's what happened. In Auschwitz, we worked every day of the week, most of the Sundays, with a few days exceptional, where we were free not to work. On this fateful day, we were told there'd be no work. Maybe around 9 o'clock in the morning, 2 officers of the SS that guarded us, which were supposed to be doctors, came into the barracks where we lived, told us to strip naked and to face them. When my turn came in, I stood at attention because the Germans thought that prisoners ought to act like an army. We stood at attention, and the officer said, turn around. I turned around. He says, face me again. Faced him. He said, go to the right. And then upon this, the guard said, you can get dressed. However, some of the prisoners had begun to show the signs of malnutrition. Maybe their eyes were bulging, ribs were showing, maybe they were unsteady on their feet as they approached the doctors. We're told to go to the left. Every prisoner had a number, and I have a number tattooed on my left forearm. My number is 171952. This number was taken down on a sheet of paper. The prisoners were released and set to get dressed. Another week passed by, and the same thing occurred. Today, no work. Again, early in the morning, guards came in with a list which had taken from their previous visit, came and started calling the numbers, sent the prisoners to come toward them. A father of a very close friend of mine, somebody I've known for many years, and I visited their home, his number was called. It was an elderly gentleman, gaunt looking, and apparently the officers thought he suffers malnutrition. When he came by me, he stopped and said, Severin, avenge my innocent death. Don't let the world forget what's happening to me today. You know, I stood kind of frozen with emotion for the moment, and I says, I will. Well, he was taken out of the barracks, and of course, he was executed the same day. When I survived the war, I wondered, how do you fulfill a pledge like this? You know, how do you avenge somebody's death? You're going to shoot somebody, kill somebody? Of course, it will make no sense. It will perpetuate something we don't want to do. And this is what I decided. The only way I can really memorize and perpetuate and keep his memory is, and avenge his death, is to tell the story so that this will never happen again. Unfortunately, this history, we can turn the pages back again. The only thing we can do today is to make sure that something so horrific as the Holocaust never happens again. So maybe I should start from the beginning. How did I get into the concentration camp to begin with? I was born actually in an area which was Germany for about close to 200 years. Poland lost its independence in the late 1600s. Its neighbors, Germany, Austria, and Russia, simply divided the country, separated it, and Poland ceased to exist. After World War I, the victorious Allies decided to reconstruct Europe. Actually, what you see today on the map of Europe is exactly what has happened only after World War I. Before that time, there were just the big empires, and that was all. Now the countries you see were really the ones where they were created after World War I. And Poland was among them. So in the street and so on, everybody spoke German, because there was Germany for a few hundred years. But of course, the new country, everybody spoke Polish. So I was brought up with 2 languages. When I was about 9 years of age, my father took a teacher to teach me French, because French at this time was the language of the intelligentsia. Intelligent people, educated people spoke French. When I went to high school, we had to take one Western language. It was either German, French, or English. Because when I told my father of the choices, he said, Severin, take English. I want you to know that I resisted it at this time. He says, I'm a young kid, already speaks 3 languages, Isn't that enough? He said, no, you're not going to work hard enough, take English. Well, little would I know, that the rest of my life, that's the language I'll be speaking. And when you hear my story, it's truly saved my life. When I went to high school, I joined a sort of Polish ROTC. In Poland, all males after finishing high school had to join the army. There was compulsory army service. If you joined the ROTC during the high school, you could go to the officers' school. Well, it was better to become an officer and then enlisted men, and that's what I joined ROTC. In 1939, when Poland was invaded by Germany, of course I joined the army. I felt duty-bound to join the army. And as a volunteer, sort of followed the retreating Polish army. Poland was no match for the German war machine. And all we kept doing is retreating, retreating, and retreating. Eventually, Russia declared a war on Poland, attacked it from the east, sort of squeezed between two armies. One day, our officer told us, "Okay, boys, war is over for you. You can go home." I was born in the eastern, westernmost part, easternmost part of west southern part of Poland, called Silesia. It's a mining district similar to Pittsburgh. I come from a family of blacksmiths. The name Fayerman in German, Feuermann, and then men of fire, apparently indicated the occupation of my ancestors. All nearby the villages and towns, Fayermans were always were blacksmiths. My grandfather, John, was a pretty enterprising fellow, and he, besides having a blacksmith shop, started a manufacturing operation, making bolts, screws, nuts, and forged products. When I came back from the war, the schools were closed for Poles. I could not go back to school anymore, so I asked my father if I could join him in the business. He said, "Okay, Severin, you've got a choice. You can either work with me in the office or go and work with your grandfather." And I made most really the best decision of my life. I said, I want to work with my grandfather, because my grandpa was so proud of it. I was the only member of the family following the family tradition to become a blacksmith. So I've learned how to become a blacksmith. And eventually, after I've finished my apprenticeship, he said, "You know, Severin, you have to learn how to become a tool maker. Tools are the heart of every metal manufacturing company. Anyone that manufactures products made of metal knows that tools are the most important part of it. That's how the products are made." So I went to the tool room, and the tool makers began to instruct me. Well, in the meantime, things began to change in the area where we live. Hitler declared this part of Poland back as part of Germany. He said, "A few hundred years was Germany, it's going to be German Reich again." And then things changed for us as well. As Poles, we were not allowed to operate businesses in Germany without supervision of a German citizen. We did get a supervisor, a German called Treuhändler, who supervised our company, but he was a friend of the family. It was well arranged with my father, and things went very well. We were very busy, and we made lots of money. However, he passed away, and his relative agreed to take his place. However, after a year or so, after he learned how to operate the business, he was not as friendly as his relative as well, the first supervisor. We felt that there is sort of an animosity, that he wants to get rid of us. He is now really de facto president of the company, manager, and we only work for him. And we became very uncomfortable. And again, things were slowly, don't forget, war was progressing, and things began to change. Hitler declared Germany Judenrein, means all the Jews were expelled from Germany. In the town in which I lived, it was a predominantly Jewish city. I don't know if you realize, before World War II, Poland had the largest Jewish population of any European country. In a country of 33 million, over 6 million were Jews, better than 20%. Some towns called Städels had majority of Jews, and the town when I lived was no exception. Maybe 70-75% of our population were of Jewish origin. So when Hitler declared it Judenrein, it became empty. In the meantime, America entered the war and became destroying a great part of Western Germany, especially in the West. So the Germans lost their homes and properties, and the German government decided to resettle them. What was better than send them to part which was before Poland, where we live, far away from American planes. American planes never arrived there, and slowly the Germans began to arrive. But you know how the Germans feel about the Jews. and they felt that the houses ought to be, cleaned up, fumigated, or painted, or just brought to the different standard. And of course, they needed labor. So what they did in our town, which they did in every city in Germany, they created a forced labor camp. Some cities in Germany had several camps. In our town, they created one called Kamionka. And how did they fill it? Well, very simply, they locked up a number of streets during busy time of the day and asked them for papers. Everybody had identification papers. And if you are not German and don't work in a war important industry, simply arrested on the spot all males and females and taken to that forced labor camp to work. One day, police knocked on our door. It was actually on Sunday, and arrested our entire family and took us to this camp. We assumed that this was actually because of the Treuhänder supervisor thought it was a good way of getting rid of us. They were arresting from the Poles, and that's how we landed in that camp. Well, the camp actually, the work was not very hard. We were supervised by police. The commandant was just like Stalag 17, sort of a very kind of easygoing fellow. My father befriended him, and some of the guards were like Schultz, friendly. We just kind of we coexisted very well. And however, eventually finished cleaning all the houses, and the Germans started arriving and filling them. So our commandant gathered us one day and said, "Thanks for the good job you have done. However, once you are in the hands of the German army and the government, you remain there for the duration of the war. And therefore, we have to move you to another camp." Most unfortunately for me, we lived in a town, Benjin, which is about maybe 35 miles north of Auschwitz. And they brought the camp to Auschwitz, moved the camp to Auschwitz. We arrived on a cattle train. I don't know if anyone has seen the movie Sophie's Choice. It's described exactly how it was. Very well done. We arrived actually on cattle cars, and the train arrived into the camp. The doors were flung open. We're surrounded with soldiers with guns pointed at us and snarling dogs and saying, "Everybody out!" And women and men separated. My mother, of course, went to women. I stood with my father and my uncle. I lived, as a matter of fact, with my father, my uncle, and there was 4 members of the family, and myself. In the distance, we saw an officer who kind of motioned us to come to him, and as he said, form the lines of 5, which we did, and then he told the whole group to go to the right. However, some of the older people and very young were told to stay behind. They won't have to be walked to the camp. The trucks will come and take them to the camp. The trucks did arrive eventually, and later on I found out they take them directly to the guest chambers. Only healthy individuals, men and men, were allowed to enter the camp. I don't think I'll ever forget my entry into Auschwitz. I had no idea what the camp is all about. When, after all of this selection and separation took place, it was nearly dark. I remember we walked on a road, which kind of a slippery yellow road, very kind of a slimy. On both sides there were barbed wires, big towers on which soldiers stood with machine guns. In the distance there were chimneys, a belching fire, a smell of burned human flesh in the air. If anyone can imagine purgatory must look, this is what apparently it ought to be. I was very paralyzed. I was frightened. I then realized what I'm getting into. By the time we came to the main entrance of the gate, which famous Arbeit my Frei, you have seen that in pictures. We were told it's too late at night. We won't be able to be brought into the camp. Tomorrow we'll be inducted. The last night, I was in a room maybe 3 times the size of this room. I laid on the floor with my father and my uncle. My father kind of took me into his arms and said, "Okay, Severin, we were taken by bandits. We realized it's very dangerous. I don't know if we survive. If we ever do, remember, let's get to the grandmother's house in Salzburg in Austria. That's where my mother came from." And I said, "Okay, Dad, if I survive, that's how I'll come." I didn't sleep that night, I assure you. It was a horrible night. Anyway, early in the morning, we were awakened, which I was not asleep, of course. I just got up. and an officer came in and told us, any money you have in jewelry, put on the table. There was a table set on the side. I had some billfold with money and a wristwatch, which I left on the table. And they told us, strip naked and move to the next room. In the next room, there were prisoners with the various shaving equipment, standing and shave every hair on my body except for eyebrows and eyelashes. Then the number was tattooed, 171952. I was given a towel, a piece of soap, and entered into showers. After showering, drying off, the prison garb was issued. Gray and white strip pajamas, wooden shoes, a round cap without a visor. I was given underwear, of course, and then a bowl, a cup, and a spoon. And with this one, I was entered into the main camp. I was brought into the camp called quarantine camp. Quarantine camp was, so to say, designed or meant by the Germans to kind of test the ability of the prisoners to do hard work, get as much work of the men and women as they can. If they can, destroy them and bring a new group in. You know, into Auschwitz, 1,100,000 people were gassed and cremated. It was a tremendous amount of people were arriving every day, trainloads of people. So they would select any time they needed additional people, as many healthy as they needed, use them for work, destroy them. That was really the system. Maybe the best way for me to describe to you is what happened is a day in Auschwitz. Let me just take a little sip of water. We, as I told you before, we work every day of the week. We awakened early in the morning. It was still dark. Went to the latrines, cleaned up, and then breakfast was served. Breakfast consisted of lukewarm tea, herbal tea, and that's why I had the cup. And that's all for breakfast. With this, we're told to step outside and form working brigade. I was assigned to digging trenches. Crematoriums operated 24 hours a day, tremendous amount of ashes and human remains that weren't burned had to be buried. So we dug the trenches, next group filled it up with ashes, the third group filled it up with earth. Work was very hard. The group I was assigned to walked up about a mile or less, maybe a little bit less than a mile from the entrance of the camp, started digging trenches. For tools, we received just picks, shovels, wheelbarrows. Guards were among us, guarded us and pushed us. It was never enough. They were never quickly enough. Sometimes we had to run from one position to another. We were very mistreated by the guards, and we had to really watch not to be beaten, because that's all you needed on top of the poor food. And we worked like this until about noon. At 12 o'clock, lunch was served. Lunch consisted of lukewarm soup. We had to bring the soup with us. Poland being a cold country, about 12 o'clock, it's nearly cold. Watery soup. Soon I found out not to be first in line, because if you waited a little bit, maybe you could get a tomato and then a potato or some kind of a vegetable. Otherwise, it was just plain warm water. 25 minutes, 30 minutes for lunch, back to work. Afternoons were worse. The soldiers were nervous. They were standing among us. Sometimes it rained, and they got wet, and so of course they were chaffing at it. They were very unhappy. More prisoners were beaten. More prisoners would fall to the ground, couldn't do the work anymore. We sort of dragged ourselves until finally became dark, and we went back to the camp. As we left our tools on the shed and walked back to the camp, as we entered the camp, music was playing. There was always an orchestra as we arrived and left, and we had to march in a military fashion. We were counted as enter the camp and back to the barracks. However, we're not allowed to re-enter the barracks until all the camps were counted. And there was just several tens of thousands of prisoners. There were 5 major camps in Auschwitz. It took hours for it. So that was one of the worst part of the day. We were tired, we were wet, sometimes it snowed, it rained, and we stood for hours until all the camps were counted, all clear was sounded. We were finally allowed to get back into the barracks. And then dinner was served. Dinner consisted of 4-inch square of bread, dark, very unappetizing. One day, a little bit of margarine. Next day, a spoon of jam. And the third day, a piece of sausage. Germans are very well organized, never missed it. And that's all to eat. Of course, that was not enough to perform the hard work the Germans expected us to do. So the only way to survive Auschwitz or any of the German camps was procure more food. And that was my main occupation. The minute I devoured my dinner, I went around to look for extra food. It wasn't difficult. It was difficult to get, but if somebody was ingenious enough, they were able to get a little extra food here and there from prisoners that had better privileges. Prisoners that stayed for 2 or 3 years in Auschwitz were given greater portions of food, were better treated, and often, if you did some work, which I did for them, cleaning their places, mending their socks, or being sort of like a servant, they gave you a little bit of their food. However, a lucky thing occurred to me. We lived in barracks. Barracks of about 200 to 300 prisoners in each barracks, long rectangular buildings. On both sides there were shelvings, 3 high, wooden shelvings. On each shelf there was a strong mattress. 5 prisoners laid on the shelving like sardines. We got a blanket to cover us. I used my clothes when I undressed at night as a pillow, and that's how we slept. In each one of the barracks there was a supervisor, and each one of the barracks had a German supervisor. Hitler emptied all the prisons, and all the criminals were taken out of the prisons and sent to various concentration camps to be supervisors. It's called capos, where their title, from the German head, rather Latin head for head. A capo in our particular barrack was a petty thief, I think, from Frankfurt, Germany, kind of a very easygoing fellow. However, he wanted to learn how to speak English. Well, why he wanted to learn English? Well, he was sure that Germany would be victorious, eventually would conquer England, and he might be sent to a concentration camp in England. So he better learn how to speak English, give him a head start. So he said a word throughout the camp, who can teach him English? Well, remember, I took English in high school, and I knew he would know much difference how much I speak. So I said, so to say, offered my services. Apparently nobody else did. Somehow, miraculously, I was chosen to be his teacher. And that changed my life. As a couple had many privileges. First of all, he was dressed differently. He had a beautiful outfit in black, high boots, and he had all the food, because as they brought the food, every day he could take as much as he wanted. And then don't forget, I told you, over 1,100,000 people were killed and cremated, but most probably close to 2 million in total arrived into Auschwitz. And every one of the prisoners brought some food with them, because they thought they were going to be resettled. Well, the minute they arrived into Auschwitz and the doors were open and the cars where they came, the guards told them, leave everything behind, step outside. Well, of course, these people were processed into the camp, and what remained over there was then distributed among the capos and the factories that were built all around Auschwitz. And so capo received food, extra food. I remember when the Hungarian Jews were brought into that was the best food I think I've had in my life. There was this beautiful food, was just this ham, rather the sausages, and the bread was just delicious. So food was plentiful. Well, this couple had a lot of privileges. He was very respected by the guards, or not respected, but sort of had a freedom of movement in the camp. And he also could select as many prisoners as he needed to help clean the barracks. So he told me, you won't have to go to work, you stay here, teach me English, and then in the free time you clean the barracks. And he got a beautiful outfit for me, a new suit, custom made, all these kind of arrangements. You won't believe it, but there was just like a life in Auschwitz. There was subterranean life. There was just, you could get anything you had money or influence. So my life really improved. I got back my weight. I just felt so much better. And I figured out, however, I knew this is not going to end forever. Don't forget, I told you that I entered into the quarantine camp. That means a temporary camp. One day, maybe a month from then, I may be sent to the main Auschwitz camp. And who knows what kind of a job I will get. I may be sent to the crematorium, commandos, other horrible work. And I knew I would never survive Auschwitz. However, again, a lucky thing occurred. Germany was winning the war, but it came at a cost of many soldiers, of course, dying during the various actions. So the government went into the factories, removed all the able-bodied men and incorporated them in the army, and the factories were short of good skilled labor. And Siemens Electric Company, the company that, of course, advertises in the papers, does a lot of business in America now, and now same Siemens came to Auschwitz looking for tool and die makers. Lucky for me, because that's a trade I've learned in the factory. So they told me, you have to go through examinations. If you fail, it will beat the daylights out of you. That means you never survive it. However, if you pass, you'll be taken out of the camp. I took my chances, and I passed the examination. I was taken out of the camp. And really, this is how come that you see me today standing in front of you, is because I did not spend all my time in Auschwitz. I spent a good part of my imprisonment working for a factory. And a factory we were well treated. As a matter of fact, it was a very modern factory. I improved my skills, believe it or not. I became a more skillful, better tool maker working for Siemens during the war. And there, of course, we had fed better, we had better surroundings, and life was quite tolerable. Number of things occurred to me. I don't have enough time to tell you about it. I did write a book, which hopefully you all read. And there's just a lot of things that occurred to me while I was working at Siemens. However, war was slowly coming to an end. Russia broke through the Eastern Front and approached Auschwitz. The Germans destroyed, blew up all of the crematoriums and the gas chambers and marched us out of the camp. We walked for about a couple of days and eventually loaded on trains, and I was taken to another camp called Buchenwald. Buchenwald was a camp in the western part of Germany, actually a quarry. It was a forced labor camp of a very great magnitude. A lot of accidents occurred in a quarry and a very difficult work. And again, sort of a lucky for me, the Americans did an unbelievable job destroying most of the cities around the camp. And so as being a newcomer, instead of me sending to the quarry, I was sent to the cities to clear the rubble after the bombardment. And that turned out to be a very easy job. We had few guards, and if you have few guards, you don't work. You work as little, of course, in the camp as you possibly can. And besides that, in between the kitchens and the kitchens, which were partly destroyed homes, we could find extra food. Remember I told you the most important things, extra food. That was survival of the camps. So my job wasn't that difficult, as I told you, and I was able to procure extra food. Again, Germans being so well organized, Siemens was able to trace me to Buchenwald. And I was transferred from Buchenwald to the main headquarters in Berlin. And I work in the northern part of Berlin called Siemensstadt, in a huge, gigantic factory, about 4 or 5 blocks. Second shift as a tool maker, again, an unbelievable factory, gave me a new view of operations, and I really, really became a good quality tool maker working for them. But by that time, I want you to know, Berlin was bombarded by the Americans and the British every day. You could wind a watch. At about 10:30, 10:45, American planes would come, destroy part of the city, and fly away. Same thing in the evening, 11 o'clock, the British night bombers would come, do the same thing day in and day out. As a matter of fact, it turned out so that around 10:30, our supervisor comes and says, okay, boys, lock up your toolboxes. The Brits will be here any moment, and you might get ready to get into the shelters. Well, one night, the British came over Siemens, apparently with instruction to destroy it. And I lived through a bombardment. I want you to know that's not funny. It's a very, very unpleasant experience to live through. The British did an unbelievable job, completely destroyed the factory. I don't think there were 2 bricks on top of one another. Once we all clear sounded, I came out. There was nothing but smoke and ruin. So, of course, I went back. That was at night, or maybe it was 2 o'clock in the morning before we got back to our camp. And then what's next? Well, the job was lost. I had no employment. And again, I want you to know, by this time, the American Air Force or airplanes were over Berlin pretty constantly. There was just no alarm sounded anymore because they were coming and going, coming and going. Well, one day they came over the camp. They spotted the camp. And we went into the trenches. There was over 1,000 prisoners in the camp. And the Americans dropped incendiary bombs and burned the camp down. And maybe 15, 20 minutes later, really a miraculous experience. I want you to know, I lived through it, and you think you see it in the movies that Hollywood made it, but the accuracy and the speed and the daring of the American pilots was unbelievable. Smaller planes came in and started circling the camp. We realized that the attack is still on, and then they start lower themselves in a spiral and start shooting at the guards. There was over 1,000 prisoners in the camp. Not a single prisoner was killed. 90% of German guards were either wounded or dead. Unbelievable, a true miracle. Well, I could have escaped, but I was in the middle of Berlin. I have no money. I have a tattoo, no hair, striped outfits. I don't want anybody. I said, I'll wait, see what happens. Well, maybe 15, 20 minutes after the alarm was, the Americans left. The German police came in, rounded us up, and took me to my last camp. The last camp I was in was Sachsenhausen. Sachsenhausen was a camp north of Berlin, sort of a private camp of Hitler and Hitler and his bunch. And most of the, you might say, prime ministers and high officials of countries that were conquered by Germany were imprisoned in there, and also Germans. I don't think people realize how many Germans were in a concentration camp. In Sachsenhausen, there were clergymen. There were whole rows of buildings in which nothing but clergymen lived, because the Germans didn't trust them, didn't want them if any around. Every day, a number of German civilians were brought up from Berlin, from the city, and placed in front of near the main gate, painted with black paint, a white sign was put on them, said, "Ich bin ein Verbrecher," I'm a criminal. And then at the end of the day, they were lined up against the wall and shot. So the Germans treated their own people quite harshly as well for whatever minor crimes they have committed. However, there was no work. We just sat around and did nothing. Well, soon enough, we began hearing a bombardment of the city. The Russian army was approaching Berlin. So the Germans walked us out of Berlin on my final death march. Death march means that they gave us no food, no drink. Day, we walked all day long. At night, we slept in various forests on the ground, just laid blankets, rounded, 2 or 3 guys together, covered with blankets, and no food whatsoever. The only time we received food, which is again, I think, a miracle of miracles, is that Red Cross came through the front lines. I don't know how they ever did it. It's just unbelievable. As a matter of fact, since that, I've been always a director of local Red Cross chapter, because I always felt it's unbelievable what they have done. Somehow, the Red Cross came through the main lines, spotted us, and gave each prisoner something to eat. Well, K-rations only they could bring along. The Germans opened each ration and took all the cigarettes and chocolate, the good stuff, and everybody got one thing. I remember I got a milk, powdered milk, a can of powdered milk. That's the only bit of food I got after nearly a whole week of walking. My last day of imprisonment occurred in a quarry. They put us that night in a big quarry, surrounded us because it was guards. When I woke up in the morning, most of the guards were gone. So I climbed out and I asked, find out what's going on. They said, most of the guys have left. You guys can go. The Americans are coming and the Russians are from the other side. So I found out where the Americans are, and of course told my friends to follow me, and we walked all day. And I remember it was a beautiful day. It was April, sunny like today. And we walked all day, and I didn't want to stop. I said, I know they may change my mind. They can capture me again. I keep on walking. So at the end of the day, we saw an unfamiliar tank I've never seen, and a soldier standing in the middle. There was a GI blocking the highway. So we approached him. He looked at us, sort of a bedraggled as we must have looked, and waved me across the tanks. I was saved by the American army that was rushing along the North Sea to intercept the location of the various V-bombs that the Germans have created at the end of the war against there was no, so to say, defense. The only way to do is capture the site from which they were launched. And that was my salvation. Once on the other side of the tanks, some American officers came by and said, we'll have trucks to take you to a camp. I was moved to, actually by that time, I came very close to the North Sea. I was near the city of Lübeck, right near the North Sea. We're taken to a submarine school, German submarine school, which of course was vacated, was empty, was operated by United Nations. I speak several languages, so I applied for employment, and I thought I would improve my English working for the Americans. And I recovered, got my strength back again, and then I remember what my father told me, that if I survive, I should go to Salzburg. So I asked permission to leave the camp. They gave me a little bit of sort of like a letter of recommendation. So with that letter of recommendation, a small little suitcase, a few meager belongings I had to get, I stepped outside of the camp. By that time, there was no transportation, no radio, no post office, nothing. You just had to depend on your own to move. The only thing was moving were American trucks. So, of course, I stopped and hitchhiked, and of course, you know the American boys. They stopped and says, "What do you want? Where you want to go?" I said, "I want to go to Austria." So, hop in, we'll take you in. So they passed me on from one to another, and eventually I got into Austria. It's a long story how I got to Austria, but eventually I did get to Salzburg. When I came to Salzburg, I really forgot where my grandmother's house is, so I went to the police, and they directed me to the prisoners of war office, and I walked to this office, and I told them my name and told them I'm looking for my grandmother. There was a gentleman sitting behind a desk looking at me for a few minutes, didn't say a word. Then he came around and said, "You're the first person I can say that the whole family survived. Your father, your mother, your uncle are here every day asking about you. And you were the last one apparently to come. Hop in, I'll take you to your grandma." So can you imagine, my whole family survived, my father, my uncle, but nothing happened to them, just like a miracle. You can imagine what a happiness, how happy we were reunited in Salzburg. However, my father went back to Poland, trying to, of course, get a factory that with our property. The Polish government has nationalized all businesses, being under a communist system, and we were told that we better leave. So my father simply returned back to Salzburg and said, "Well, we need to emigrate." Well, again, I remember my work with the United Nations. I went back to the United Nations office, local office, and they gave me employment. I became an interpreter and got a British uniform. I was very proud of it. I finally walked just like one of the Americans, the British I was working. I wasn't a civilian anymore. So it was a wonderful time. Eventually, however, I realized, well, I didn't want to stay in Europe. I want you to know, after what happened to me, I said, I'm not staying in a country where they're killing women and children. What I have seen is unacceptable. I want to emigrate. Well, at that time, President Truman made it possible for displaced persons, which we were at that time, to come to America. His whole family went through the proper doctor's examinations, and we were admitted to the United States. We came on a troop ship called Marine Perch, and as we arrived, we had no money. So to arrive to the port of New York, the ship anchored out, didn't enter the port yet, and the immigration people got on board, gave us a piece of paper in lieu of passport, $20 and a handshake. It says, "Welcome to your country." So with $80, how the family landed on the 12th Avenue in New York City. Fortunately, I was prepared for it. I realized that that's what was going to happen to us. So I've got some letter of recommendation from the United Nations to the Travelers Aid. I went there and they said, "We'll put you up for a week in one of the hotels." So the first week in America, we spent in a hotel off Broadway. And of course, we're looking for work. At that time, it was very easy to find work. And people were, of course, America was still at war with Japan, and employment was very easy to obtain. So every member of the family got a job. My mother attended a little apartment I was able to find in the Bronx, and we began our life in America. In the fall of that year, one day after dinner, my father turned to me and said, "Severin, this is a wonderful country. We need to start our life here again. Why don't you quit what you're doing, see if we can find another company we can buy, and start our life in America again?" I said, "Okay, Dad, if you want me to, that's what I'll do." Because all the friends that we had, and the rest says, "You're crazy. You have no money. You don't speak English very well. You don't know how to do business in America. What do you mean you're going to start a business?" Father says, "Don't listen to them. Do what I tell you." So I started looking through the New York Times and looked at the various little factories. Nothing really appealed to me. One day I saw an ad, Baldwin Tool and Die for sale in Newark, New Jersey. So I hopped on the tubes, which is the kind of a train to Newark, met the owner. The owner was of a German origin, speak German. Of course, I speak German. And I said, I'm a Landsmann, not exactly a Landsmann, but so, to make friends. And he said, how much money do you want for your business? Well, it was called Baldwin Tool and Die. He says, I want $20,000. Well, we didn't have $20,000. All we were able to accumulate at that time was $6,000. So I says, we'll give you $5,000 down, and we have to start with something. So we will pay you a mortgage of $200, $250 a month. Well, my father entered the negotiation. We made a deal. And so on January 2nd, 1946, we opened the doors with $1,000. And as you've heard before, the rest of it is really a story of American dream. This company we've built up to a world-class hardware manufacturer. Our hardware is in the White House, in the most finest buildings in America. Every president of the United States, when they leave the office and build a new residence, Baldwin goes on it. We are in one of the most distinguished buildings throughout the world. Today, we're a world-class company. I don't own it anymore. I sold it in 1980. Actually, Stanley Black & Decker owns it now. And we are considered really just the finest hardware that is made any place in the world. And so, as you can see, my very sad story has a very happy ending. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you. Pretty good.
Yeah, you're right on time. As predicted. Well, we have some time, and it's really as long as anyone wants. What questions might any of you want to pose? A unique opportunity, yes?
You attributed luck to helping you survive. What else within you would you say helped you survive?
Very good questions. As a matter of fact, and I'll let you ask. I think I attribute this to three major things. First, I was educated. And that's what I think is so important. Education is the base of making right decisions when you have to make it. Secondly, languages. I speak 7 languages. When I was young, I spoke 5. And speaking German fluently was an unbelievable advantage. I could understand what the guards were talking to one another and giving directions. They used me often as an interpreter. I was already treated better because I was of greater use. And the third thing that saved my life, unquestionably, is having a skill. Being a tool and die maker really is what saved my life. I was useful to the Germans. They didn't want to destroy me because I could help them, with their war machine, in the industry. And that really is, I think, how I attribute I don't attribute to luck. I don't believe in luck. You create your own luck. In life, opportunity to be, this is the luck. It's an opportunity. Right opportunity came in, that's what we did. We entered the business at a time when all the hardware was made in castings. I come from a family of forgers. I don't know castings. So I introduced forgings to the hardware industry. Believe it or not, today, the whole world, everybody forges. Nobody casts. Back to new process we have introduced. We have done so many things because opportunities came in. Opportunities came in to develop a lifetime finish. We're the only first company in the world to bring a lifetime finish to hardware, guaranteed never to tarnish. Again, opportunity. Each time opportunity came in, we grabbed it, and that's what really made I think this how I contribute my success and survival, of course, to these 3 major attributes.
Have you been back to Auschwitz?
I have not been back to Auschwitz. As a matter of fact, I want you to know, I don't watch the movies, I don't go this. It opens the wounds too much. It's true what I told you from the beginning. I don't want to see it. When I see the movies about concentration, like Sophie's Choice and similar movies, it's just shocking to me. It's something I really put in the back of my mind. It's there, but I don't bring it out.
Have you been back to Germany?
I've been back to Germany. I've been back to Poland. As a matter of fact, my father had good connections with the Polish government because he was imprisoned with the Polish ambassador to the United States. And so later on, he informed my father that if we won the business, we can have it. That it's not working very well. They're not interested in running it anymore. They want to give it back to us. So he sent me. So I went back to Poland to look at it. And it was shocking. You know, I went to see the plant was in terrible shape. You know, roof was leaking. The Russians, when they left Poland, took all the machinery out. There was no longer the same type of equipment. They were making paper boxes. And I said, no, thank you. You can keep the business. So I went back. It was deplorable. You can't believe it. The influence of communism. No one can realize it, but if you come to a country after a communist rule, it's absolutely unbelievable. Drunkenness, debauchery, prostitution is just absolutely, all the morals are destroyed. It's just destroyed the fiber of humanity. I was so shocked with what I saw. It was really a shocking experience.
So you haven't been back in the last 10 years or so?
No, I haven't been there. Maybe 15 years, maybe. I did go back because we had some family members. But in the last, I wasn't there since Poland became independent.
There is no question that if you go to Berlin or Germany, you see that the conscience, you can't walk any place without some recollection of the Holocaust, and the whole nation is concerned about remembering that. It's a startling situation with respect to what you expect as a Jew going there and what you see. Indeed, I'm told that the Jewish Museum in Berlin is probably the most frequented museum in the world under the circumstances. It's an interesting phenomenon.
Exactly.
The third generation.
You're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, I did go back to Germany itself. I was talking about Poland before, because once I saw the company, the Black & Decker and Siemens, Black & Decker had a number of plants in Germany, and I was sent to Germany many times. And I met a lot of educated Germans, and exactly what you were saying, I've heard. Many of them had told me, they realized that, of course, I have, that when I was born and I went through the camp, this is absolutely, we can't believe it. We can't believe that happened in our country. I said, Mr. Fayerman, what we do, we have all our children, we take them to various concentration camps, which are now museums, and we show them what happened in the country. It's a black mark. We must never forget that. Some of them take them to Israel, to show them something. They're definitely very, very much conscious of it. There's no question about it. Often I was just thinking, how that could have happened in Germany is still becoming an enigma. I want you to know it would take us to be hundreds of years that books would be written. People would wonder how that could have happened in Germany. A country of such high culture, such unbelievable level of education and music, and culture. How can these cultured people have done it? They couldn't understand, and nobody will ever understand what circumstances led these wonderful people, to act in the way that they have acted. It's just a bunch of goons were able to do it. It wasn't most of the Germans, of course, it was the SS and these people that was obsessed. There was an obsession with them killing Jews. Do you know that SS, as they were retreating from Russia, they often would leave their equipment and the guns and took the Jews to the next town so they can shoot them. It was just an obsession. It was the most important thing for them to do, to destroy the Jews. Well, Poland exactly, which had 6 million Jews or more, I think a few thousand survived. So Hitler did an unbelievable job on these people. There's no question.
And finally, would you share with us the most startling thing about the camp that I saw, other than the crematory and all that, was the latrine.
The latrines.
That's where the socialization occurred.
Yeah, that's right. The camp was the most dreadful, most horrible experience you could see. Very drab. Everyone, of course, with the striped outfits, dragging themselves. It was just like a life of dead people walking, so to say. Most depressing. However, they were clean, I must say. The latrines were maintained well during my experience. I have witnessed some horrible things. As a matter of fact, in my book, I've not written about all the horrible things I've seen. I've seen an unbelievable scenes of horror. But I felt this is something it's just like watching, a murder occur. You don't want to think about it. It's not good for you anymore. So I've sort of put this aside. In a book, I wrote one little episode, which I think I could not forget. It would occur one day when, or I don't know how it happened, why I walked out of the barracks in the evening. We were not allowed to do so. Somehow I was outside and I saw trucks going by, and the trucks, there were prisoners. They happened to be naked because when they were taking them to the guest chambers, they didn't want the clothes on them. So the prisoners stripped naked, and naked bodies, naked live people were taken by. Happened to be women going by. And one of the girls jumped out of the truck and tried to run, realizing what's happening to her. So of course, they had a convoy behind it, and there were people on. There was an assessment on a motorcycle. Ran up to her, pushed her to the ground, jumped on her, and just kept on jumping until he killed her. It was horrible experience I have had. Was for being in the camp, but there was some of many, and which again I didn't want to write about, and I didn't want to. I just tried to forget it. Because it's not good. It just makes you a miserable person. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think we're getting to the witching hour.
Yes. You talk about retribution is
yes.
Your way to tell the story. How do you deal with or counteract the words of some world leaders that say it's all a myth, it never happened?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Well, when I hear this, of course, I've been asked something similar. It's really nonsense. First of all, American government has done something that no other government has done, and for that it will be highly praised. There were the Nuremberg trials. Nuremberg trials is really where the German sort of criminals, leaders of the German Nazi party, were tried by a tribunal in which they were defended by German lawyers, and the guilt was approved. They admitted to all the things being done. So, if you don't believe of what the courts would tell you, what can you believe? It's a fabrication of people that either are insane or Jew haters, and they want to really keep on continuing this hate. It's just like saying, well, Christopher Columbus did not discover America. First, Washington wasn't the first president, and there were no Indians. When he came here to America, it was empty, Who says there were Indians? I mean, saying nonsense that we know it wasn't there is just kind of it makes you speechless. I don't think it's worth even answering the question. You have to, of course, do it, but that's the way I answer it. I think it's just ridiculous. Yeah. I lived through it, believe you me. It did happen.
It is 9 o'clock, and I want to thank, first of all, thank you for coming today and sharing your story with us. It's very moving for me to hear, but I was introduced to Mr. Fayerman because he comes to Daniel Boone, where my wife teaches, and quite regularly, and tells parts of his story to the school children. And he's spoken. I know many of you in here, your children have seen him speak, and some of the children encourage you to come hear him in person. And so there's much about this work that he does all around that's very, I think, very important and wonderful. And we thank you for sharing with us today. In terms of